And now we're joined by our next guest. His name is Sam Webb. Second straight year we've had Sam on. He's the publisher of the Michigan Insider via 24/7 Sports, also the host of the Michigan Insider on WTKA. Sam, you got John Schmeelk and Lance Medow here in New York and New Jersey. How are you today, man?
I'm doing great. How about you guys?
We are doing great, and Michigan with a slew of players coming out here in the draft this year, Sam. And I want to start with Nico Collins because I thought he had an unbelievable pro day. He's a guy that opted out last year. I saw him at the Senior Bowl, and I think there were some questions about his ability to create separation. We knew about his size, his long speed, contested catches, but I think people wondered about his separation ability, and I think he did all he could between that 4.43 40-yard dash time and 6.71 3-cone to show that he's more than just a over-the-top, size, speed, contested catch guy.
Yeah, I've been following Nico since high school and wasn't surprised. I mean, the thing that impressed me the most about Nico coming out, he's gotten a lot bigger since he got at Michigan as far as the mass that he put on, but watching him as a high schooler, obviously the same height, but maybe about 15, 20 pounds lighter, was his fluidity at that size. I mean, you guys know, been watching football a while. Long guys like that, big receivers like that, they can lumber sometimes when it comes to
absolutely.
When it comes to getting in and out of their breaks. They can be gangly, but he has great fluidity, great burst. He can break down and explode out of a break like a guy that's 5'11", 6 foot. That always impressed me a ton about him. Sorry about that. That always impressed me a ton about him. And I wasn't surprised to see him show that. I wondered more about what his 40 time would be. I think if you watched him at Michigan, you saw him get deep, pretty regularly. I mean, if it wasn't one of those, if it wasn't a reception, it was a pass interference. And so, would that translate to big time 40 speed? And I think he showed that on the stopwatch that he's not just a jump ball guy. He can be a deep threat too. So he has all the tools. The biggest question about Nico will be, he just didn't have the elite numbers. He didn't have the elite production, the elite statistics that would maybe wow a team. You'll be going off measurables and some projection, but I think a team is going to get a steal if you see him slide down into, that second or third round.
Well, 19.7 yards per catch in 2019. That is a very attractive number, especially when you're looking for explosive playmakers in the NFL. I guess my question in terms of Nico Collins, maybe the numbers, as you just alluded to, Sam, not necessarily jumping off the page, how much was that? Because I know we've talked about this with previous LSU players. How much was it the reflection of just the Michigan offense not being explosive and consistent enough that he just was at the mercy of who he was playing with?
So I think it had to do with a couple of things. You mentioned the mercy of who he was playing with. I think that was the case, but not in a way that fans might be thinking. He came in a heralded receiver class. And so it's why he may have been downplayed a bit how good he was, because he came in with two All-Americans and Donovan Peoples-Jones, who made a splash last year with the Browns, and a guy named Tariq Black, who went on to transfer to Texas. Those were two, 6'2", 6'3" receivers, much like him, much higher in the rankings. And so the reason why I mentioned them is you had to spread the balls around. And those guys got a lot of the action, not just them. I mean, there's another receiver named Ronnie Bell. He got some of the action. So the Michigan's sort of desire to spread the wealth, I think it kind of limited his number. And you can make the argument that with the production that Nico put up, the times that he was targeted, that he should have been targeted more. That in the end, I think there's a good chance that he'll wind up being the best of those guys, even with how well Donovan hit the scene last year with the Browns. So I think it had a lot to do with who was on the team with him, but not in a way that, where he was playing with guys who weren't very good. I think it was, hey, you were playing with some other really, really talented receivers, and then, at Michigan, they're going to really try to run the football too. They aren't going to be pass happy. I think that limited his numbers as well.
Sam, I want to jump down to the defensive side of the ball, and this is a similar question to the one that Lance just asked you. Kwitty Paye, who when I watch him on tape, boy, his explosion off the ball, his initial burst, it's all fantastic. 6'2", 261. I know he was probably disappointed he couldn't do all the different events at his pro day. I think he had an injury on his 40-yard dash, right? So he couldn't really do much after that. But I think the question that I'll ask is this: why didn't his production match those types of tools that you see watching him on tape?
Yeah. it was. I hear. It looked, man, it's going to be that way with some of Michigan's guys. It was that way with Rashawn Gary, who the Packers went with in the first round a couple of years back. Kwitty is an elite athlete. Kwitty coming out of Rhode Island, he was like an 11-second 100-meter guy. But he was really kind of learning the game. I think he surprised Michigan not in becoming a player, but in how soon he became one. He wasn't supposed to be a guy that would come in as a freshman and play right away, but he did. And so he's a high IQ player. He's a guy that, when you look at Michigan's scheme, he was charged sometimes with not pinning his ears back, but with setting an edge or occupying a blocker so a blitzer could come through. I mean, there's some schematic things that would limit his numbers too. At the same time, I mean, I thought that at his junior year that he really needed to show up bigger in the biggest game. And so if there was a criticism that went beyond, the scheme was holding him back. In some of the bigger games, he didn't show up in the way that you need an elite player to show up. Now, we didn't really get a chance to measure that in his senior year because he was hurt, and then he opted out the rest of the way. So it's hard to say that he didn't improve because we didn't have a chance to really see that. If you're a coach and you look at those numbers, though, you got to be wild with a guy that big, that fast, that explosive. And like I just told you, he's a really high IQ guy, super motivated, super hungry, a team guy, a yes sir, no sir guy. He checks all those boxes. Again, if I go back, though, it would be the big game performances. We really didn't see it against Bama in the bowl game. We didn't see it against Ohio State. We didn't see it against Wisconsin. That would be the question from his junior year if I were a GM looking to draft him.
Sam, it seemed as if they moved him around a bit in terms of his alignment on the line. And I guess when you look at the measurements, you look at the numbers, one of the first things you do is you look for the pressures, you look for the sacks, specifically a player like that. But I'm always interested, when they ask a guy en route to getting to the quarterback to also stop the run, how effective can a player be? What it all jumped out to you about his upside in terms of stopping the run as opposed to just being a pass rusher?
Yeah, so you bring up a great point. That's another thing that could limit his sack numbers, and it speaks to. So this is different from the conversation with Nico, where I said, hey, his numbers are limited by who he was playing with because he was playing with some really, really good guys. Well, on the defensive front, I mean, gone are the days. I mean, the talent around him on the defensive line steadily declined, and I think that's one of the reasons why you saw Jim Harbaugh, the performance of the overall defense decline, and ultimately Jim Harbaugh make a change at defensive coordinator. I mean, they didn't have the Taco Charltons, who was a first-round pick, the Chris Wormleys, who's a tenured NFL guy. Now, the Mo Hursts, who I love with the Raiders, those kinds of guys weren't around him on the defensive line, so you were able to, dedicate some more attention to him. And it made it so he had to, kick inside at times in pass rush situations and be a 3-tech and try to get some pass rush from the interior. He was versatile enough to do that, but that's not ideal. That's not how you want to use him.
Sure. So
that's another way his numbers were limited. But to be frank, again, go back to his junior year in those big games. That's one of the ways in which the lack of production maybe manifests the most. I mean, Wisconsin bowled Michigan over. He didn't have a great game stopping the run against Wisconsin. Didn't have a great day stopping the run against Ohio State or Bama. So that's a defensive thing. But if you were to grade him individually, I think that's what you would look at. But like I said, that was junior year stuff. Kwitty in his senior year he looked quicker, he looked bigger, he looked stronger, and we just didn't really get a chance to measure it because he basically didn't play last year. So I think he's a guy that you roll the dice on because I know just watching the arc of his growth as an athlete, I think it's easy to project that for a good coach. I mean, if you're a good coach, you can take that, you can make something out of it.
And I think same deal. We can't really judge how much Ambry Thomas has improved last time we saw him on the football field either. So he said, I listened to his media availability after the pro day, and he said, look, I thought I was maybe the best cornerback heading into this year in the Big Ten, and I still think I'm one of the best cornerbacks in the Big Ten. And he ran a 4.37 at the pro day, 5'11", 191. He was an opt-out in 2020. How should NFL GMs, Sam, look at him? Is he a guy that you might be able to get a real nice bargain on because of that opt-out, where maybe you get him in the third round, but he's really an early second-round value?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the kid. I mean, more than as much or more than any other player that Michigan has coming out this year.
Wow.
I love his mentality because it's not just his athleticism. You know, I watched him come up from, you know, his freshman year at Detroit King all the way through Michigan. And you knew he was an elite athlete, but his mentality, his demeanor on the field, you love that. I mean, he stepped into a position that was, I mean, you got some big-time guys. You got David Long in the NFL. Lavert Hill was an all-Big Ten player, right? You got some guys. You know, Michigan had been churning out some corners, so he really had to wait his turn. And when his turn came, though, and this tells you something about the kid, he had an illness. He had a major bout with colitis that knocked him out prior to his junior year, that summer between his sophomore and junior seasons. And so he lost. I mean, he was down to like 150 pounds.
Man.
You know, they didn't know that if he would be able to play maybe until Big Ten play. It was that dire. But here, this kid, he's in the hospital, running stairs, you know, doing things doctors don't want you to do. By the time the season rolls back around, he was back up to 175, 180. And, you know, by the time fall camp rolls around, I should say, by the time the season rolls around, he's back up at 190. He started the season and played the season and played at a pretty good level. And that's after missing basically the entire offseason. So a kid with that kind of toughness, and he's a leader. I mean, he holds his teammates accountable. I mean, he's the kind of guy that will run off-season workouts. I just think that kid is scratching the surface of what he could be. His best football is without question ahead of him because he had to wait his turn first, so you didn't really get a chance to see him on the field right away. Then when his turn came, he's coming off an illness. He's not getting much pass rush either up front. That's another issue. And then last year rolls around, and, oh, by the way, he opts out of the season due to the COVID shutdown. So someone who does their research is going to get an outstanding prospect in Ambry Thomas. It was about brushing up his technique and getting him bigger. I think those things happen. It's going to happen even more at the NFL level. Someone's going to get themselves a steal if he gets to the third round or later.
Sam, speaking of scratching the surface, because I find that phrase interesting to the next player I'm going to bring up, because here's another guy in my mind, small sample size, you like some of the flashes. The question is, what can happen at the next level? That, to me, is linebacker Cameron McGrone, who appeared in 19 games, just 15 starts at middle linebacker, made a lot of disruptive plays in 2019, though, as you could attest, it just wasn't a lot of games in 2020. What have you seen out of him that maybe also could say whoever does do their research could get a versatile or a disruptive player out of him?
Yeah, Cam is another guy. He jumps off the page at you with his athleticism. People who are concerned about his knee injury, he suffered a knee injury in high school, prior to his senior year. I think it was the summer after his junior season. Oh, no. I think it was like December after his junior season. The kid was back running in March. And we watched him at a camp in May. He was already back down to 4.6. I mean, the kid is a really, really supreme and superb athlete. I think a legit criticism of Michigan is that kid should have been getting more snaps. He should have been getting more snaps to get him ready to be the guy at the position. Hard to do when you got a Devin Bush in there, right? Hard to say that you're going to find some snaps in there, but working him in next to Devin or getting him some more action in front of maybe some guys that were more veteran but not as talented would have helped his development some. So I think the aspect of his game that you saw flash the most is he's an outstanding blitzer. A lot of guys you send on blitzes, they just go on a blitz, but do they make anything happen? Do they get there? Do they get caught in the wash, or do they get a pressure? Do they get a sack? And he's a guy, you send him on a blitz, he's going to wreak some havoc. But you're also going to see some times where his inexperience shows when it comes to diagnosing plays. That's legit, right? That you question that it's going to take some development. But again, you roll the dice and you got a guy that can run like that at the linebacker position. He's not only a sideline guy, he's a guy that can carry tight ends down the field if you want him to. He can moonlight in crunch situations. You want him to line up over a slot or cover a running back. He's the guy with the athletic talent to do that. Needs to be coached up in that way. Michigan wasn't a heavy zone team, and by that I mean they were very basic in their zone. They were a cover 2 spot drop team, not very sophisticated in the kinds of zones or the variances of zones that they ran. And so it's going to take some coaching up. But if you do that, again, you got another guy that is really, really talented. And like you said, scratching the surface, he could be one of those guys. I mean, I think we've seen more of Ambry to be able to say, definite steal. With Cam, it's more of a projection to me, but one that I would certainly be willing to take.
How about Jaylen Mayfield, 6'5", 326? The guy just looks like an offensive tackle if you built one in a lab. Where do you think he might go, and what do you think his future upside is in the NFL?
Late first round, early second round, a pit bull of an offensive lineman. They did a good job of taming him when he got to Michigan. Watching him in high school, he was a guy that they say play to the whistle. He would play until the whistle stopped, right? So he would push it all the way just short of getting flagged for unnecessary roughness. He's one of those types of dudes. But again, a guy who brings you prototypical size at a legit 6'5". He's a good athlete. He is going to be versed in the run game and run blocking. I think that he's a guy that has the versatility. If you wanted to play him on the left side, he could. And a guy, one guy whose word really, really stands out, the offensive line coach for the Chicago Bears, Juan Castillo. He was an analyst at Michigan before he went back to the pros to take the Bears job, and he just raved about Jaylen Mayfield. I mean, that's the guy, the sleeper team. I don't have the draft order in front of me to really be looking at where the Bears fall, but he's definitely going to be a guy on the Bears board. You can mark that down because I know Juan Castillo loves Jaylen Mayfield.
There are two guys that I think are worth bringing up on each side of the football. Carlo Kemp, the defensive lineman who's got a lot of length, mainly played nose tackle, and then running back Chris Evans, who I found interesting that it looked like they lined him up as a slot wide receiver at times, but his numbers as a receiver don't necessarily jump off the page. So if you could sort of break down those two guys in particular, Sam, and, if anything, what teams could potentially get out of them if they try to target them later on in the draft.
Yeah, so and let's start with Chris Evans. So the reason why they put Chris Evans at the slot is because he's an exceptional receiver. And that's really where they recruited him. When they recruited Chris out of Indianapolis, I mean, it was as a slot receiver. He was gonna be a part of Michigan diversifying their offense and giving them a weapon out of the slot with some open field ability. But they got in camp and they said, "Oh wait, this dude is not afraid to run between the tackles." He was actually pretty effective at running between the tackles and earned some playing time as a true freshman running back. And I think that a couple of things happened. He got bigger. And you could say that he got bigger to the point where maybe it slowed him down some as far as his 40 speed was concerned. So it was necessary for him to sort of find the optimal size for him. I think he understood he needed to get bigger to run in the Big Ten, but you don't need to get so big that it keeps you from having the kind of burst that you had when you're a much lighter player. So I think that was a journey for him. And then the other part was, he was suspended for a season. There was, he had an academic thing that put him out of the, not just off the team, but out of the university. He, instead of going to another school or trying to go to the NFL early, he literally worked his way back. He got a job. He trained on his own. He coached football. He coached the local high school team. He coached some 7-on-7 teams with some little kids. I mean, this is a kid that really worked his way back just to get an opportunity at Michigan to finish and then go to the NFL. So you see a guy that shows you he's willing to battle through some adversity, even self-inflicted adversity, and has some legit receiver skills out of the backfield. As far as Carlo Kemp is your classic try-hard guy, high IQ guy, selfless guy on the interior. Whatever you need him to do, you want me to plug a gap, I can do that. He spent some time playing on the outside and might be best suited, as a strong side defensive end at that level. It'll be interesting to see what pro teams think of him. But you think a lot of his football IQ because of the family that he comes from. The Paganos are his uncles. And so, you're talking about, and their dad, his granddad and the Pagano's dad, Sam Pagano, is like one of the all-time great coaches in the history of Colorado high school football. He's coached big-timers like Tony Baselli was one of his guys, for instance. So you're talking about a guy who comes from really, really good football stock, can really, really think the game, not your super explosive athlete, but a guy that you can plug in that is going to be good against the run, going to be a good locker room guy, a good solid, depth-like defensive lineman for a team that wants to jump on.
Real quick, one Ambry Thomas follow-up. Is he a guy you're going to play outside, or are you going to put him in the slot?
I think you could do both. To me, I think that he is a more than capable outside corner. But if you wanted to, if a team had those positions on lock and they wanted to bring him along, and nickel in the NFL is
it's a starting job. Yeah, it's a starting
right?
position. Absolutely.
Yeah, so he's a guy that can do that. He's quick enough to stay with your shiftier receivers. I think that he's not going to be a liability. It's not like the NFL; they're running the football a ton like they do in college. I think Michigan would always lean towards the former defense coordinator would lean towards having a safety play nickel because he was so concerned about teams being able to run the football on him. But a guy like Ambry can do that. A guy like Ambry can play there and still be solid in the run game too. But I would play him on the outside. He has prototypical length. He can jump. I think his vertical at his pro day was 38 inches. He's going to be strong enough as well. He's been working on his body. I just think that Ambry Thomas is going to be one of the steals from Michigan's class for sure.
Now, last year, I asked you this question to close our interview, and you gave me Michael Onwenu, and he ended up being a starter in the NFL right off the bat. Who's the Michigan guy, and maybe you already talked about him, in which case your answer could be very quick, that you think nobody is talking about enough that could be an impact player?
Ambry Thomas. Ambry Thomas. You watch. It's something about those kids from, Mike Onwenu was a Detroit guy too. Mike Onwenu was a Detroit Cast Tech dude. And Ambry Thomas, you're talking about Detroit King. They just cut from a different cloth, grinded out, dog mentality. Mike had an interesting journey too where he had to work his way into the right body size to be able to contribute. And you felt like his best football is ahead of him. I think there's some similar themes at play with Ambry. His best football absolutely ahead of him. We're going to talk next year. You're going to say, Sam, yeah, you're right, man. You're 2 for 2. Michael Onwenu and Ambry Thomas. You watch. You just call me next year so we can revisit this conversation.
We look forward to it, Sam. Good stuff, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam.
All right, guys. I'll talk to you.
Be good, man. Great job by Sam Webb. Just good job. Of course, he's the publisher of the Michigan Insider. for 24/7 Sports. And you can also find this show, The Michigan Insider, on WTKA Radio out there as well. Lance, two big schools there. I don't know how the hell Michigan didn't win more games this year. I mean, they have some really good players coming out. Holy cow.
Yeah, well, I think their offense left a little bit to be desired in terms of their overall production. But
and we should know, too, that two of the guys you talked about did opt out this past year, too, which also might have something to do with it.
Yeah, I would say just a tad when you can't rely on some of your big game changers on the field. That's a big reason why Michigan struggled to stop the run, as even Sam alluded to when we were talking about some of the defensive players and the importance of pass rushers also stopping the run en route to the quarterback, because if you can't do that, then you're going to give up explosive plays, especially if you can't finish. But, yeah, there is some depth within this Michigan class. I don't think there's any doubt about it in terms of Nico Collins at the wide receiver position. You know, his length, his size makes him intriguing. I threw out a linebacker who Sam even talked about probably should have got more playing time, Cameron McGrone. You know, he has certainly caught my eye. And then who we close out the conversation with in terms of Ambry Thomas, a guy that did not play in 2020, is not in the conversation with the likes of Caleb Farley and, you know, Surtain, but could very well be the next guy up if you can't grab one of those other two guys and you could get a versatile, solid corner. He seems to be very high on him. And remember, there's guys that go in the late first round to teams that are much more in a position to contend, and sometimes that's an ideal fit because they're not called on immediately to be hero. They can settle into the defensive scheme, and then all of a sudden you get a bigger impact out of them in year one.
Lance, good stuff, my friend. We continue tomorrow with LSU up in the draft prospects with Dottino and Fiegels.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Should be a lot of fun. We'll continue to do these pro days next couple of weeks. So hopefully you're learning about these prospects. I know we are as well. We thank you for being with us on today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live, which is on the Giants Podcast Network, presented by Investors Bank. You can find the archive of this show and all of our programs at giants.com/podcast on the Giants mobile app and on all of our favorite podcast platforms. Don't miss out on your chance to experience a premier hospitality experience watching Giant games and world-class concerts in 2021 as a Giants suite partner. Limited full season locations are available, or place a deposit for individual games. Call 888-NYG-1925 or visit giants.com/suites for more information. For Lance Medow, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you on Thursday at noon for another episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Until then.